My mother was on the living room couch, trying to breathe, and my husband was asking if I had seen his golf glove. That was the moment I knew my marriage was over. Not in trouble. Over. Maybe it had been over for a long time. I just had not seen it clearly until I heard that awful sound in my mother's throat. And watched Bradley straighten his collar like we were late to brunch instead of watching a woman fight for air. My name is Megan. I was 33 that summer. I was living in a big house in a gated suburb outside Dallas, with a husband who cared deeply about appearances, and a mother who had moved in with us after a heart procedure. She was only supposed to stay a few weeks. Then there were complications, medication changes, follow-up visits, and the kind of fatigue that turns simple things into hard things. She ended up staying 3 months. I did not mind. She was my mother. Bradley minded from the second her suitcase crossed our front door. He never said it directly at first. With Bradley, nothing ugly ever arrived. Ugly, it came dressed up as concern, as efficiency, as common sense. Your mom should really be in a place with medical support. This setup isn't sustainable. I just think we need our space back. What he meant was simpler. He did not like being reminded that real life existed inside his carefully curated home. That Sunday morning, real life was on our couch in a pale blue cardigan, gripping the armrest so hard, her knuckles had gone white. "Mom?" I dropped to my knees in front of her. Her lips looked wrong. Her skin had that gray cast I had only seen once before. Years earlier, when my father died in an emergency room with too many machines around him. "My chest," she said, barely getting the words out. "Megan, I can't." She pressed one hand to the center of her sternum and the other against her left arm. Sweat had gathered along her hairline. Her breathing came shallow and uneven, like her body had forgotten how to do something basic and urgent. I turned and shouted toward the kitchen. "Bradley, get the car." He appeared in the doorway with his keys in one hand and a travel mug in the other. Clean white shoes. Pressed gray slacks. Navy golf polo. He looked expensive and rested and completely out of place in that room. "What happened?" "She's having some kind of cardiac episode. We need to go now." He glanced at my mother, then at the wall clock. I still remember that pause. Not because it was long, because it was enough. "My tea time is in 35 minutes, he said. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" "With Trent and the regional team," he said. Like that explained anything. "This is the one I told you about." I stood up so fast, I almost made myself dizzy. "Bradley, I do not care about golf. She cannot breathe." He set his mug down on the console table by the entryway and frowned, irritated now, as if the problem was my tone. "Then call an ambulance. My car is still at the shop. You know that we're 20 minutes from the nearest hospital. Just give me the Tesla." He slipped the keycard into his pocket. That small motion changed something in the room. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. "I'm not missing this game," he said. I stared at him. "You cannot be serious." He exhaled through his nose the way he did when a restaurant got his order wrong. "Megan, your mother has been living here for months. Every week, it's some new medication issue. Some follow-up. Some emergency. I am not rearranging my life every time something goes sideways." On the couch behind me, my mother made a weak, choking sound. I moved toward him. She needs a hospital. He stepped back before I could reach for the card. Then he looked past me, directly at my mother, and said the sentence that burned the rest of my marriage to the ground. She is a burden. Everything in me went still. He lowered his voice. Maybe because he knew the words were ugly. Maybe because that made them feel more powerful. She has been a burden since the day she moved in. And I am not making this my problem. Figure it out. He turned, opened the front door, and walked out. I followed him to the entryway. I'm not even sure what I was going to say. Scream. Grab his arm. The door shut in my face before I could decide. A second later, I heard the car pull out of the driveway. The whole house went quiet except for my mother's breathing. I did not cry. Something colder took over. The part of me that knew panic wastes time. The part of me that had spent 10 years working in risk analysis, cleaning up messes created by men who assumed consequences were for other people. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The operator kept me talking while I knelt beside my mother and counted her breaths out loud. I slid a pillow behind her back. I held her wrist. I repeated her name until it stopped sounding like a word and started sounding like a rope I was trying to keep hold of. It's okay. Mom, stay with me. Stay with me. She nodded once, but her eyes had that frightened, faraway look people get when they know their body is doing something it should not be doing. The ambulance took 11 minutes. I know because I watched every second of them happen. When the paramedics came through the front door, I nearly collapsed from relief. They moved fast. Electrodes, blood pressure cuff, oxygen-mask. Questions I answered without fully hearing. How long has she been in distress? History of heart disease? Current medications? One of them looked up at me as they lifted her onto the stretcher. She needs a hospital now. I know. I said, I rode in the ambulance with one hand around the rail and the other wrapped around my mother's fingers. The siren cut through the Sunday morning, loud enough to drown out thought. I watched the monitor. I watched the medic's face. I watched the city blur by through the back windows and tried not to imagine what would have happened if I had wasted even 2 more minutes arguing with my husband in the foyer of our house. We were rerouted from the nearest hospital to a cardiac specialty center because her rhythm was unstable. That was the word the medic used. Unstable. It sounded clinical, contained. It did not describe the way my stomach dropped when he said it. By the time we got there, my hands were shaking. The hospital lobby looked more like a luxury hotel than an emergency room. Marble floors, quiet lighting, soft chairs. No one wanted to sit in for long. They took my mother through double doors almost immediately, and I was sent to admissions with her wallet, her insurance card, and a head full of noise. That was where I learned the specialty unit required a large deposit up front because of the insurance issue. $5,000. Under normal circumstances, it would have been painful, but manageable. Bradley and I had plenty in joint savings. We had built it carefully over years, or at least I thought we had. Bonuses, automatic transfers, all the adult things you do when you think you are building a safe life with someone. I told the woman at the desk I would handle it. Then I sat down in the waiting area, unlocked my phone, and called Bradley straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I stared at his name on my screen, feeling something hard settle into place inside me. Fine. I thought. I opened my banking app to move the deposit out of savings. For a second, I assumed I was looking at the wrong account. I backed out and logged in again. Same number. I went to the transaction history. Then I saw it. A series of transfers. Large ones. Not one bad decision. Not one reckless purchase. Multiple deliberate withdrawals over several days. Each one authorized through Bradley's credentials. My throat went dry. I scrolled faster. More transfers. Another one. Then the final balance at the top of the screen. So small, it almost looked like a glitch. I was still staring at it when a text alert dropped across my phone from a bank I did not recognize, asking me to verify a flagged charge linked to my mother's information. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was just cruelty. Something else was wrong. Something bigger. And sitting there in that bright, cold hospital waiting room, while my mother was behind a locked set of double doors, I realized I did not yet know the full shape of the man I had married. I kept staring at the screen like the numbers might rearrange themselves if I looked long enough. They did not. The joint savings account Bradley and I had spent years building was almost empty. What remained was insultingly small. The kind of balance that made the whole thing feel less like a financial problem and more like a message. I pulled up the recent activity again. 3 transfers in less than a week. Then another. Each large enough to hurt on its own. Together. They explained why the account had been hollowed out so completely. It made my chest tighten. Every one of them had been approved through Bradley's login. Not hers. His. The hospital waiting area was so quiet, I could hear a machine humming behind the admissions desk. Somewhere down the hall, wheels rolled across tile. A nurse laughed once, softly. Then a door opened and closed, and the sound disappeared. I sat there with my phone in my hand and thought, very clearly, this did not start today. Today was just the first day I could no longer avoid seeing it. Bradley always had a reason. If a card got declined, it was fraud protection. If a bill showed up higher than expected, it was a processing error. If he came home with something expensive, it was a client gift, or points, or a temporary work perk. And because I had my own career, my own responsibilities, and my own mother to worry about, I had accepted more vague explanations than I like admitting now. I called him again. Voicemail. This time, I did not leave a message. Instead, I opened the alert that had just come through. It was from a bank I did not use. The text was brief and automated, asking me to confirm a charge tied to an account connected to my mother's information. My first thought was confusion. My second was colder. I searched my email for the bank name and found an old message I had never paid attention to because I assumed it was junk, or some generic security update. When I opened it, I saw my mother's name, not mine, not Bradley's, my mother's. I read the message 3 times before I fully understood what I was looking at. It referenced a recovery number on file. My number? That made sense, because I handled most of her digital paperwork after her procedure. But the account itself was not supposed to exist. I stood up so abruptly, the chair legs scraped against the floor. A woman across the waiting area glanced up at me, then back down at her magazine. I walked to the far end of the room, closer to the windows, and called my sister. Sophie answered on the second ring. Megan? I did not bother easing into it. Mom's in the hospital. Cardiac unit. She's alive. They're working on her. But I need you to come right now. I heard her keys move. Then the sound of a door opening. I'm leaving. What happened? Bradley refused to take us. He left for golf. There was one beat of silence. Then What? I don't have time for the whole version yet. Listen to me. Bring Jamal. My brother-in-law was a white-collar defense attorney. The kind who read financial records like other people read weather reports. He was careful, methodical, and nearly impossible to rattle. If there was anything in the world I needed in that moment, it was somebody who did not panic when numbers started telling ugly stories. What's going on? Sophie asked, her voice tightening. I think he drained our savings. I said, and I think he may have used Mom's information for something. She did not speak for half a second. Then she said, very calmly, we're on our way. By the time I hung up, the admissions coordinator was walking toward me with a clipboard. Ma'am, do you still want to process the deposit? Yes, I said. I opened the wallet in my bag and reached past the debit card attached to the gutted joint account. I pulled out the premium personal credit card I rarely touched, the one I kept only for true emergencies. It had a high limit, a punishing interest rate, and no connection to Bradley. I handed it over. As she processed the payment, I looked back down at my phone and finally noticed the newest post on Bradley's public social media account. He had uploaded it 12 minutes earlier. He was at Stonebridge Country Club, smiling into the camera with a glass in his hand, and the kind of casual confidence that only works when nobody in the photo knows who you really are. On his wrist was a watch I had never seen before. Gold, heavy, flashy enough to make a point. The caption was worse than the picture. Something smug about treating yourself after a big win. I felt my face go hot. My mother was behind a set of locked hospital doors, and he was posting like a man celebrating himself. I should have been surprised. Instead, I felt something else click into place. Bradley did not think he had done something risky. He thought he had gotten away with something. Sophie and Jamal arrived 20 minutes later with the kind of energy that changes the air in a room before either person says a word. Sophie came through the sliding doors first, still in pharmacy scrubs under a cardigan, hair pulled back too tightly, eyes already bright with panic and rage. Jamal followed carrying his laptop bag and wearing the expression he usually reserved for clients who lied to his face. Where is she? Sophie asked. In with cardiology. She hugged me hard, then pulled back just enough to study my face. You look awful. I feel worse. Jamal set his bag down on one of the chairs. Tell me everything. So I did. Not the dramatic version, the useful version. Mom collapsed. Bradley refused the car. I called 911. We got rerouted here. The deposit got paid on my emergency card because the joint savings had been drained. I showed them the account history. Then I showed them the text alert tied to my mother's information. Followed by the email from the unknown bank, Jamal read without interrupting. Sophie did not. He left for golf? She said again. Like she still could not get past it. He left while she was having a heart event? Yes. He said that to you? Yes. Her mouth flattened into a line. I'm going to kill him. No. You're not. I'm open to alternatives, she said. Jamal pulled out his laptop and sat down. Let's not do anything stupid before we know what we're looking at. That was why I wanted him there. He opened a secure browser, then looked at me. Do you have authorization to act on your mother's behalf? Yes. Medical and financial? Since the first procedure, good. He started typing. I sat beside him and watched the screen fill with account verification prompts, while Sophie paced in front of the window like she was trying not to come apart. Every now and then, she stopped to look toward the double doors. As angry as she was, fear kept leaking through it. We were both still waiting for someone in scrubs to come out and tell us whether our mother was actually going to survive the day. That fear sharpened everything. The money was not abstract anymore. Nothing was abstract. Not the way Bradley spent. Not the way he lied. Not the way he had looked at my mother and called her a burden. Like he was discussing an inconvenient subscription he meant to cancel. Jamal exhaled once through his nose. What? I asked. He turned the screen slightly so I could see. There it was. A revolving credit account under my mother's name, then a third, different issuers, recent openings, high balances, paperless statements. For 1 second, I honestly could not process the information. It was too neat, too organized, too deliberate. This was not somebody impulsively using the wrong card. This was somebody setting up infrastructure. Sophie stopped pacing. What am I looking at? Jamal's voice stayed flat. Someone opened multiple lines of credit using Diane's identity. Someone, Sophie snapped. You mean Bradley? I mean, Bradley is the obvious working theory. He clicked deeper into the files. A private mailbox, across town. Recovery routing changed. Digital notifications redirected away from my mother's real email. A pattern designed to keep the account holder unaware until the balances were large enough to matter. My stomach turned. He had done this while she was living in our house. While she was recovering, while I was organizing medication trays on the kitchen counter and driving her to follow-ups and trying to pretend Bradley's mood whenever she needed help was just stress. Sophie looked at me with genuine horror. He stole from Mom? I could not answer right away. Because yes, obviously. But that was not what made me feel sickest. It was the planning, the patience, the fact that he had not acted like a desperate man cornered into one terrible choice. He had acted like someone who believed other people's lives were resources. Jamal clicked to another tab. Megan, he said carefully. There's more. I laughed once. A short, humorless sound. Of course there is. He pulled up my credit file. I had always kept it clean. Not because I was obsessive, but because finance was my world and order mattered to me. Low utilization. No missed payments. Strong history. The kind of profile that opens doors quickly and quietly, which is exactly why the automotive financing agreement on the screen made my blood run cold. The loan amount was enormous. The collateral was a Tesla Model S. Bradley's Tesla. I leaned closer, reading line after line, while my heartbeat got louder in my ears. He told me the company arranged it. I said, some executive financing thing. He said it came with a vendor incentive package. Jamal shook his head. No. The primary applicant on the loan was me. My information, my credit profile, my liability. Bradley had been added in a lesser role, enough to access the car, not enough to own the debt. For a second, the hospital waiting room disappeared. All I could see was the first day he drove that car into our neighborhood, with the windows down and that smug look on his face, tossing me the story before I had even asked for one. I remembered the exact words now. Don't worry about it. It's structured. What he meant was simple. You're paying for it. Whether you know it or not. I sat back and looked at Jamal. How bad is this? He did not soften it. Bad enough that you need to stop thinking in terms of a marriage problem? He said, this is fraud exposure. Identity theft? Possibly elder financial abuse. Sophie pressed both hands over her mouth. I looked down at my own hands. They were steady. That scared me more than if they had been shaking, because something inside me had crossed over into a different kind of thinking, less emotional, more precise. What does he still have access to? I asked. Jamal looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. That, he said, is exactly the right question. A nurse stepped into the waiting room before he could say anything else. She called my name, and all three of us stood at once. My entire body braced for impact, but the nurse's face was calm. Your mother is stable for now, she said. The doctors are still evaluating next steps. But she's responding. The force of my relief almost knocked the air out of me. Sophie started crying first. I did not yet. I just closed my eyes for 1 second and let the words settle into my bones. When I opened them again, the room looked different. My mother was alive, which meant I could finally turn my full attention to the man who had mistaken our family for something he could use. I sat back down beside Jamal. He reopened the laptop. Sophie wiped her face and pulled her chair closer. And in that bright, quiet waiting room, while Sunday afternoon moved forward outside the glass, as if the world were normal, the three of us began mapping the real shape of Bradley's life. Not the one he posted. The one he had hidden. The first thing we did was stop talking about Bradley like he was a husband in a rough patch. That framing was dead. What Jamal was looking at on that screen was not confusion. It was method. He angled the laptop toward me and started building a list in a blank document. Accounts. Access points. Liabilities. Exposure. Not because lists solve pain, because lists stop chaos from pretending it is larger than it is. If he opened these cards under Diane's identity, Jamal said, we need to assume he'll keep using them until they're frozen. He's at the club right now, Sophie said, probably ordering drinks on somebody else's credit. I thought of the photo again. The smirk, the watch, the caption, not a man hiding, a man celebrating. Then we start there. I said, Jamal looked at me. Before we do anything, I understand what this means. Once you start freezing accounts and filing fraud alerts, you are creating a paper trail. He can't talk his way around. That sounds like a reason to start immediately. He held my gaze for another second, then nodded. Good. Sophie dropped into the chair beside me. Still keyed up with adrenaline. Tell me what to do. Nothing public. I said. She looked offended. I wasn't going to do anything public. You absolutely were. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Jamal almost smiled. No scenes. No calls to him. No warning shots. If he's still operating under the assumption that he controls the narrative, that helps us. Sophie crossed her arms. Fine. I'll be civilized. No. I said, be useful. That got a short laugh out of her. Jamal picked up his phone and called the first bank tied to my mother's fraudulent account. He kept his voice even preciso. Professional. This is a formal identity theft report, he said. The account holder is an older adult currently hospitalized after a cardiac emergency. The charges are unauthorized. I need the account hard frozen immediately. The current card deactivated, digital wallets disconnected, and the fraud team looped in now. He listened, asked for confirmation, wrote down the case number. Then he turned to me. Your turn. I took the phone for the second call. The second bank representative started with the usual script until I cut across it. I'm not disputing one transaction. I'm reporting a fraudulent line of credit opened under my mother's identity. I need the account suspended and the file escalated today. Something in my voice made the woman stop trying to manage me and start helping me. On a B1, we moved through them. Card issuer, fraud department, verification, freeze, confirmation number. By the third call, I stopped hearing words like a daughter and started hearing them like an analyst. The pattern was all that mattered. Where the statements had been rerouted, which contact points had been altered, how recent the charges were, whether the digital credentials were still active. Each answer told the same story. Bradley had not stumbled into opportunity. He had built channels. I ended the last call and set the phone down. Done. I said, on Diane's side. Jamal said, yes. He clicked back into my credit file. The Tesla loan sat there like a loaded weapon I had been carrying without knowing it. Huge balance. Clean payment history. My liability? My credit at risk. If he decided to default or disappear, can we unwind it? I asked. Eventually, Jamal said, but first you need control. Sophie leaned forward. Meaning? Meaning if he's using a vehicle financed almost entirely through Megan's profile, she has leverage. I knew what he meant before he finished saying it. I looked directly at it now. He loves that car more than he loves anything. I said, Sophie muttered, including oxygen? Jamal's eyes stayed on mine. Do you still have app access? Yes. Insurance? I opened the policy portal from memory. My name was primary account holder. Of course it was. He's listed as a driver. I said, not primary. Then do not touch anything yet. Jamal said, we decide the order first. That was the thing about him. He never confused anger with strategy. Jamal forced us into sequence. First objective, protect Diane. Second, isolate Megan from active liabilities. Third, document his access and usage before he knows the wall is going up. Fourth, once the domestic side is stabilized, figure out whether the money trail points anywhere bigger. The phrase hung in the air. I looked at the drained savings account again. The number still bothered me, not just because the balance was low, because the withdrawals were too clean, too targeted, too fast. This did not look like a man buying random luxury nonsense because he lacked impulse control. It looked like a man moving money with a purpose. What do you mean? Bigger, Sophie asked. Jamal shifted one hand over the trackpad. I mean, men like Bradley usually tell the same lie in multiple directions. He clicked into the transfer records again. Zooming in on the routing data, I want to know where the money went. The room went quiet. I had been so focused on the fact that the money was gone that I had not yet let myself sit with that question. Not what he took, where he sent it. Jamal exported the visible transactions and started tracing identifiers. Some routes dead-ended. Others bounced through intermediate institutions. One of them triggered a longer pause. He leaned in closer. What? I asked. Nothing yet. That tone means something. It means I'm not guessing before I know. Sophie stood up again and resumed pacing. I hate lawyer answers. You hate answers that don't arrive as fast as your emotions. Yes? She said. Correct. A vibration buzzed through the chair beside me. My phone? Bradley. For a second, none of us moved. He was calling me for the first time since leaving the house. Not when my mother was on the couch. Not when the ambulance came. Not when I called from admissions. Now, because now something in his world was starting to snag. I let it ring. Then ring again. Voicemail. A text followed almost immediately. Why are my cards not working? Another. Call me now. Then one more. What did you do? Sophie let out a breath through her teeth. There he is. I looked at the screen without opening the thread. The thing about panic is that it strips people down fast. Bradley had probably hit the first point of friction 15 minutes earlier. A declined charge, a frozen digital wallet, a problem at checkout. I still did not answer. Instead, I opened the Tesla app. The vehicle map loaded within seconds. Bright red pin. Stonebridge Country Club valet area. He validated it. I said. Sophie gave a disbelieving laugh. Of course he did. Not just parked it. Displayed it. My phone buzzed again. Another call. Then another. I muted the device and set it face down. We need the house secured before he starts thinking ahead. I said, that had not fully landed on me until I said it out loud. House keys. Lock codes. Garage access. Camera access. Everything Bradley had could still reach through our front door, unless I cut it off first. Sophie stopped pacing mid-stride. I can go. I looked at her. I'm serious. She said, give me the code changes. Tell me where the backups are. And I'll do it. Jamal nodded once. That makes sense. He's not there. I pulled my purse onto my lap and found the emergency key ring attached to the inside zipper pocket. Front door backup. Interior garage key. Side gate. A little brass label on each one because I always labeled things and Bradley always mocked me for it. You know where the lock cylinder is in the mudroom cabinet? I asked Sophie. Her eyes lit with grim satisfaction. Top shelf. Right side. Behind the batteries. I stared at her. How do you know that? I've been your sister all your life. I know where you hide useful things. Fair. I handed her the keys. And text me the admin password for the security panel. She said, I will. She took a step toward the door, then turned back. Am I allowed to move his stuff? Jamal answered before I could. Do not damage property. That is not what I asked. I looked at her for a long second. Get him out of the primary bedroom. I said, neatly enough that nobody can accuse you of destroying anything. She smiled in a way that made me slightly afraid for Bradley's wardrobe. Understood. Then she was gone. For a moment, I just watched the doors close behind her and thought, this is what family looks like when the emergency is real. Not speeches, not optics. Motion? Jamal reopened his laptop. Now, he said, we deal with the vehicle. I called the insurance company first. Not dramatically, not like a woman on the edge, like someone reviewing a policy she legally controlled. Once the representative verified my information, I asked a series of careful questions about coverage. Listed drivers, notification procedures, and what happened if a finance vehicle's policy status changed. He answered in the measured tone of someone who assumed this was an administrative matter. I let him finish. Then I said, I need the policy on that vehicle terminated effective immediately. There was a pause. Ma'am, because there is a lien holder, I understand. If the policy is canceled, the lender may be notified and may take protective action. I understand that too. The representative shifted into disclaimer mode, liability, risk, recommended alternatives. I acknowledged all of it. Then I canceled anyway. When the confirmation email landed in my inbox, I felt no rush of triumph, just certainty. This was not revenge. It was boundary enforcement with legal paperwork behind it. Jamal read the email, nodded, and said, "Good." "Good?" I asked. "It means if the lender or recovery network moves fast enough, his symbol of success becomes a problem before sunset." I opened the Tesla app again. The car was still at the club. My phone vibrated with another call from Bradley. I ignored it and searched for an asset recovery company that handled high-end vehicles. I found one with a direct number and called. A man answered on the second ring. I explained exactly what mattered and none of what didn't. The car was financed under my name. I had master digital access. The authorized user was my estranged husband. The insurance had just been canceled. The car was currently in a public valet area, and I needed it recovered before possession became a moving target. "Lady," the man said, "domestic situations are messy. This is not a domestic argument." I said, "This is a liability issue attached to my credit file." That changed his tone slightly. I emailed the documentation while he stayed on the line. Title structure. Financing page? Policy, termination, confirmation, current G, P, S, screenshot, silence while he reviewed it. Then, if this checks out, we can dispatch. It checks out. Another pause. Then, all right, if my driver can get there clean, we'll pick it up. I ended the call and stared out the hospital window. The sky over the parking lot had gone whiter and flatter. That washed out Texas afternoon light that makes everything look overexposed. Somewhere across the city, Bradley was probably trying to charm a bartender into rerunning a card, irritated first, then embarrassed, then afraid, and here, in a cardiac hospital where he should have been from the beginning, I was stripping away one false layer of his life at a time. My phone lit up again. This time, I opened the voicemail transcription without listening to the audio. "Megan, pick up the phone. I don't know what game you're playing, but this stops now. My cards are being declined. Call the bank." No mention of my mother. No. How is she? No. Are you okay? No. Was I wrong? Just logistics. Access. Service interruption. I deleted the voicemail. Jamal was still working through the transfer identifiers. Quieter now. More focused. That usually meant he had found a thread worth pulling. "What is it?" I asked. He kept his eyes on the screen. "I said earlier I wanted to know where the money went." "Yes. I've got one of the endpoints." My body went cold all over again. And it doesn't look like a personal spending account. Sophie texted me then, "At the house. Locks first." Then I'm touching his closet and pretending I'm a better person than I am under any other circumstances. I would have laughed. Instead, I typed back the panel password, the backup admin pin, and the instructions for disabling his garage and camera access. Then I looked at Jamal. If it's not personal spending, then what is it? He finally turned the laptop so I could see the routing summary. I recognized the structure before I recognized the name. An offshore holding entity, corporate linked, clean enough on the surface to hide inside legitimate traffic, ugly enough underneath to make my pulse pound. For a second, I forgot where I was. Because that transfer pattern did not belong to a man covering golf tabs and watch purchases. It belonged to a man patching something, a hole, a deficit. A problem, he believed, had to disappear fast. Jamal leaned back in the plastic chair. "Megan," he said quietly, "I think your husband didn't just take your money." I looked at the screen, then at him. What did he do? He closed the laptop halfway. Not because he was done, but because he knew the sentence was about to change the whole shape of the day. "I think he moved it to cover something bigger than your marriage." There is a specific kind of silence that falls when a theory becomes a pattern. I looked at the routing summary on Jamal's screen and felt the whole day shift under me. Until that moment, Bradley had still existed in a category I could emotionally understand, even if I hated him inside it. A vain husband, a selfish man, a liar with expensive taste and no moral center. But this was different. This suggested structure. It suggested that whatever he had done to me and my mother was not the main event. It was spillover. A side mechanism, a way to keep pressure off something larger that was already cracking. Jamal reopened the laptop fully and started moving through the routing trail again. "Tell me exactly what I'm looking at." I said, "It's an offshore entity." He said, "Registered through a chain designed to look bland and legitimate. The kind of structure you use when you don't want ordinary review to stop at the first page. Could it still be personal? Anything could be personal if you bury it deep enough. But this doesn't look like luxury spending. It looks like temporary capital placement." The phrase landed hard. Temporary capital placement. That was finance language for money being moved to make a picture look different than it really was. Sophie called while he was still talking. I picked up immediately. "I'm inside," she said, low and breathless, like she was walking and talking at the same time. "His access is dead. Front panel. Garage. Cameras. All of it. I'm changing the physical cylinder now." "How's it look?" "Like a model home designed by a man with no inner life." That tracked. "And his things?" I asked. A pause? Let's just say I have interpreted "get him out of the primary bedroom" with conviction. "Even through everything." I almost smiled. "Don't break anything." "I haven't broken anything," she said. "I have relocated his identity." I ended the call and looked back at Jamal. "He no longer gets into my house." "Good," he said. "Now we make sure he can't talk his way back into the rest of his life." He clicked into the transfer metadata again and searched the entity name against a corporate registry database he had access to through work. Nothing useful at first. Then a parent firm. Then a connected services chain. Then, finally, something that made him sit back in his chair. "What?" I asked. He turned the screen. One of the linked administrative service firms had ties to a vendor structure used by Bradley's company. Not a random company. Not a friend's startup. Not some side investment pitch he might have gotten conned into. His employer. I stared at the name and felt every piece of the day start locking together. His obsession with optics, the oversized spending, the speed of the transfers, the fact that he had taken our money in several large movements instead of a series of flashy buys. The audit language he used at home sometimes without realizing I was actually listening. Quarter-end pressure. Reconciliation. Temporary timing issues. International licensing. Vendor delays. I had heard all of it for years. Not as secret, but as noise. The background hum of his self-importance. Now it was rearranging itself into meaning he was plugging something. I said. Jamal nodded once. That's what it looks like. A hole. Likely. In his company books, that would be my working assumption. I stood up and walked to the windows. The hospital parking lot below looked oddly calm. Family sedans. Nurses crossing in pairs. A food delivery driver, checking his phone beside the curb. The kind of ordinary scene that makes private catastrophe feel almost insulting. Behind me, Jamal kept talking. If he skimmed money or manipulated reporting somewhere inside his work structure, and if an internal review or audit was coming, he may have needed capital fast, enough to make the numbers hold long enough to survive scrutiny. With our savings. With your savings, he said, and likely with Diane's identity supporting his other spending. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Bradley had not emptied our account because he was reckless. He had emptied it because he was cornered, which meant 2 things. First, he was more dangerous than I had thought. Second, he was more vulnerable. My phone buzzed again across the arm of the chair. Bradley, then another call, then another. I answered on the 4th. The first thing I heard was traffic noise and his breathing. Megan, what the hell is wrong with you? He snapped. My cards are locked. My digital wallet isn't working. And somebody took the Tesla. I leaned against the window and said nothing. I know you did this, he said. Call the bank and undo it. Right now, still nothing from me. Then, because silence is a solvent, and Bradley had never been able to sit inside it. He kept going. You can't just destabilize everything because you're emotional. Do you understand what you've done? I had things under control. That sentence lit up every nerve in my body. Honor control, not. We had money to protect your mother. Not. I'm sorry I left. Not. Is she alive? Just. I had things under control. You should be at the hospital. I said. He went quiet for half a beat. Not out of shame. Out of recalculation. How is she? It sounded inserted, late, functional. I almost laughed. You tell me, I said. You seemed comfortable leaving. Megan, don't do this. Don't do what? This performance. His voice sharpened. If you're angry about this morning, fine. We can deal with that privately. But you do not get to start tearing through accounts and assets because you're upset. There it was again. Not marriage language. Ownership language. He was not talking like a husband trying to fix something. He was talking like a man furious that an unauthorized person had touched infrastructure he thought belonged to him. I kept my voice level. Our savings is gone. Silence. Then, it's not gone? That answered more than a confession would have. Where is it? I asked. A car horn blared somewhere near him. I moved it temporarily. For what? It's being handled. For what? Bradley, you would not understand the mechanics? I looked out across the parking lot and felt an actual chill move down my back despite the warm glass. Mechanics? He was saying the quiet parts out loud now because panic had made him sloppy. You used my mother's identity? I said. He exhaled hard. You need to stop repeating words you don't understand. My mother's, Diane's credit history was sitting there unused. He said. Too fast. Too defensive. It was leverage. Short-term leverage. My hand tightened around the phone. Leverage. That was what he thought people were. Did you hear yourself? I asked. Megan, I am trying to keep us from imploding. No, you're trying to keep yourself from getting caught. The silence on the line changed. Up to that point, he had still been speaking with the reflexive arrogance of a man accustomed to recovering control by escalating his tone. Now, for the first time, I could hear him considering the possibility that the room he thought he occupied alone might already be crowded with people who understood his language. What have you done? He asked. Quieter now. Nothing. I said, I stopped covering for things I didn't know I was covering for. He swore under his breath. Then he tried a new angle. Megan, he said. Lower. Now. Almost intimate. Listen to me. I know this looks bad. I know today was a disaster. I shouldn't have left. I shouldn't have said what I said. But you are reacting in a way only one of us. I thought, aloud. I said, Is there an audit on Monday? He did not answer. That was answer enough. Bradley. No. He said it too quickly. Then, not in the way you think. That one was even better. I turned from the window. Jamal was watching me from across the waiting room. Expression still. Eyes sharp. He could not hear Bradley's words. But he could read my face well enough to know we were past theory now. Who's the money supposed to satisfy? I asked. Megan, an internal review? A vendor reconciliation? What exactly did you move our savings to cover? You need to stop asking questions over the phone. Because you know the answers. His breathing got louder. Then came the line that finished him in my mind more completely than anything he had said that morning at the house. I can fix this, he said. But not if you keep interfering. Not? We can fix this. Not. I can explain. Not even. I'm sorry. Just that same rotten center. His emergency? His repair? His right to use other people until the danger passed. I ended the call. Sophie texted at the exact same moment. Front locks changed. Garage dead. Cameras reset. His clothes are in bags in the downstairs sitting room because I'm a woman of restraint. I wrote back. Perfect. Leave the bags there for now. Come back to the hospital. Then I looked at Jamal. He said Diane's credit was leverage. Jamal's expression did not change much. But something in it hardened. And he moved the savings temporarily. He said I wouldn't understand the mechanics. He didn't deny the audit. Jamal absorbed that, then nodded once. That's enough for me to stop thinking in hypotheticals. He opened a secure notes document and started typing while I repeated Bradley's exact phrases back to him. He wrote them verbatim. Not because dramatic language matters. Because people reveal themselves. In the words they reach for under pressure, Bradley kept reaching for the language of structures. Liabilities. Leverage. Interference. Not love. Not remorse. Not family. Jamal finished the summary. Then closed it and looked at me. You have 2 tracks now. What are they? Domestic and institutional. I already knew what that meant. But I wanted him to say it. Domestic is protection, he said. Fraudulent. Lockouts. separation of liabilities, restraining measures if he escalates. Institutional is where you stop treating this as something you can contain inside the marriage. My pulse slowed instead of rising. If I take the institutional track, I said, there's no putting it back. No? He said, there isn't. A doctor stepped into the waiting room, then looking for me. Every thought left my head at once. I crossed the room so quickly I nearly forgot my phone on the chair. He was middle-aged, calm, tired around the eyes, in a way doctors often are after long procedures. He explained what they had found, what they had stabilized, what the next hours would look like. Not easy, but better than they feared on intake. She would need careful monitoring. There would be decisions ahead, but she was still here. Still here. I thanked him twice and only realized after he left that I had been holding my breath through half the conversation. When I turned back, Jamal had closed the laptop. You all right? He asked. No. I said honestly. Then, yes. Enough. I sat down again. What would you do? I asked Jamal. If this were not your family? He did not answer quickly. I would document everything. Then I would put the truth in front of the people with the strongest incentive to act on it. His company, yes. I nodded slowly, because he was right. Human resources would make this interpersonal. Legal might contain it. Middle management might stall. But the wrong kind of money in the wrong place, right before the wrong kind of review, that belonged to finance, compliance, executive leadership, internal security. I can do that. I said, of course I could. I pulled my laptop from my bag and set it on the little waiting room table beside Jamal's. What are you doing? He asked. Building the version nobody can dismiss. He gave me a long look, then nodded. All right. So I built it. Timeline first. Mother collapses. Bradley leaves. Hospital intake. Deposit required. Savings accessed. Account found drained. Fraud alert tied to Diane's data. Multiple credit lines. Tesla financing under my profile. Transfer route. Offshore endpoint. Bradley's own language on the phone. Then evidence. Screenshots. Timestamps. Routing data. Public post from the country club, placing him away from the emergency while using visible luxury signals. Copies of the Tesla financing. Summary of the fraudulent credit activity under my mother's name. Notes from the phone call. A concise explanation of why the transfer pattern suggested temporary balance support rather than ordinary consumer spending. I did not need to embellish. Jamal reviewed each page as I finished it. Good, he said at one point. Then, tighten this sentence. Then, move that screenshot earlier. It proves access before motive. An hour passed. Maybe more. Time in hospitals becomes soft around the edges. At some point, Sophie returned carrying 2 coffees and a face that said she wanted to ask 15 questions, but could tell she was walking into a room where the temperature had changed. What did I miss? She said. I looked up at her. He wasn't just stealing from us. I said. He was trying to hold something else together. She set the coffee down carefully. At work? I nodded. And now? I looked at the open document on the screen. Now, I said, I stopped treating his secrets like private property. By the time the binder was done, the sun had gone down behind the parking structure, and the waiting room windows reflected us back at ourselves. 3 people around a table under hospital lights, coffee cups, legal pads, 2 laptops, a family emergency unfolding in one wing of the building, and a financial collapse taking shape in another. I found the contact page for Bradley's company leadership and located the CFO. Not because he was the nicest person to email, because he was the person least likely to care about how this would feel. I attached the file. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for only a second before I wrote the message. Not emotional, not vindictive, but it's easy. I identified the materials as evidence of a potentially urgent financial irregularity involving one of their senior employees. I stated that personal funds appeared to have been transferred through an offshore linked structure connected to their vendor ecosystem within 48 hours of an expected review period. I noted that the employee in question had access to my financial profile and had already engaged in documented identity, misuse, and fraudulent borrowing elsewhere. I recommended immediate preservation of his digital access systems and communications pending internal review. Then I read it once, twice, and sent it. No speech, no warning to Bradley, no final marital showdown, just the truth. Placed exactly where it would become expensive to ignore. 5 minutes later, my inbox refreshed. A reply. Brief, direct. Sent from the CFO. It himself. Received. Reviewing now. Do not contact anyone else at the company until security reaches out. I stared at the message, then handed the laptop to Jamal. He read it and gave the smallest nod. That was fast. He knows what he's looking at. I said, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Bradley. Unknown number. I answered. A man introduced himself from Bradley's company's security team and asked if I was available to verify the timeline and maintain custody of the supporting documentation. I looked through the hospital glass at my own reflection. Tired face. Pulled back hair. Bloodless fluorescent light. And I realized the story had fully changed shape. This was no longer a wife figuring out how to survive a cruel afternoon. This was an institution waking up to the kind of risk Bradley had spent years hiding in plain sight. And somewhere in the city, while my mother recovered under cardiac monitoring, and my sister sat beside me with cooling coffee in her hands, Bradley was still thinking the worst thing that had happened to him today was losing access to his car. He had no idea the rest of his life had just started moving without his permission. Bradley called 12 more times that night. I did not answer any of them. By then, the sound of his name lighting up my screen no longer felt like a crisis. It felt like evidence. Around 10 that evening, a nurse finally led me to the cardiac recovery floor. My mother looked smaller in the hospital bed than she had on our living room couch that morning. The oxygen tubing, the monitors, and the soft mechanical sounds around her should have made the room feel frightening. They did not. They made it feel ordered, managed, like a place where people were actually doing their jobs. Her eyes opened when she heard my voice. Megan? I went straight to her and took her hand. I'm here. Her grip was weak, but it was there. Real, warm. That was the first moment all day. I let myself feel the full force of what almost happened. Standing there beside her bed, looking at the woman who had spent my whole life showing up whenever things got hard, I understood how close I had come to losing her while my husband was busy protecting a tea time and whatever collapsing lie he thought mattered more than a human life. You're okay, I said. though I think I was saying it as much for myself as for her. She studied my face in that slow post-procedure way people have when they can tell a lot has happened without knowing the details yet. "Rough day?" she asked. I almost laughed. "You could say that." She drifted back to sleep a minute later, and I stood there a little longer with my hand on the rail of the bed, letting the machines and the quiet do what they do best. Reduce the world to what matters right now. Alive, still here, everything else could wait. When I got back downstairs, Sophie was half asleep in one of the waiting room chairs with her head tipped against the wall. Jamal was still awake, reviewing notes on his laptop under the dimmer evening lights. "How is she?" he asked. "Stable, resting." He closed the computer. "Good." I sat down across from him and looked at the dark hospital windows. "What happens now?" He gave the honest answer. "Now we let the systems move." That turned out to be exactly right. By Monday morning, Bradley's company had suspended his internal access. Not quietly. Either. The security team called me before 8 to confirm receipt of the materials and ask one more time about the timing of the transfers. Their tone had changed since the first call the night before. Less cautious, more urgent, which told me what I needed to know. Somebody senior had already looked at the file and decided this was no longer a hypothetical problem. At 9:13, Bradley left me a voicemail that began with anger and ended in panic. He said his badge had failed at the building. He said security had taken his company laptop. He said I had gone too far. I deleted the message before it finished. Just before noon, Jamal got the first formal acknowledgement from one of the fraud units handling my mother's accounts. Case numbers, escalation codes. A request for preserved copies of any communications or financial screenshots tied to the identity misuse. By early afternoon, the company's security lead called again to confirm that Bradley's communications and access logs were being preserved for internal review. That phrase mattered. Being preserved meant they were no longer looking for a misunderstanding. They were protecting evidence. The domestic side moved more slowly, but it moved. The lock changes at the house held. The garage no longer recognized Bradley's phone. His camera access was dead. The bags Sophie had made with restraint were still sitting in the downstairs sitting room when I finally went home late Monday evening. A neat wall of tailored fabrics, polished shoes, golf clothes, an expensive emptiness zipped into black nylon and waiting like somebody else's problem. I stood in the foyer, keys still in my hand, and realized how different the house sounded without him in it. Not quieter. Exactly. Cleaner. You do not notice how much tension a person drags through a home until that tension is gone. Bradley had a way of making every room feel evaluative. Like the furniture was being judged. Like dinner could become a complaint at any moment. Like your body needed to stay 1 degree braced because comfort was never fully safe around him. That feeling was gone. And because it was gone, I could finally name it. I walked into the kitchen, set my bag down, and just stood there for a moment looking at the counters, the breakfast nook, and the half-dead herb plant by the window. My mother always forgot to water when she visited. It looked like the same kitchen, but it did not feel like the same life. Sophie came by that evening with soup, extra phone chargers, and the kind of practical tenderness that passes for love in our family. "You should eat," she said. "I know." "You should sleep." "I know." "You should also admit I handled the lock situation beautifully." That got the first real laugh out of me since the ambulance. "Yes." I said, You were a model of professionalism. I was, she said. Then her face shifted. Softer. How bad is it? I knew what she meant. Not the money. Not the case. The marriage. I looked down at the kitchen island and told the truth. I think the worst part is that none of this feels surprising anymore. She stayed quiet. I'm not saying I knew. I said, I didn't. Not the actual shape of it. But now that it's visible, I can't pretend there weren't signs. I just kept sorting them into smaller categories so I didn't have to look at the whole pattern. Sophie reached over and squeezed my wrist. That's not the same thing as causing it. I know, and I did know. Still, there is a particular grief that comes with realizing the person who hurt you did not transform overnight. They were becoming themselves in front of you the whole time. You just had other things to do besides decode them. My mother spent 4 more days in the hospital. I went every morning before work and every evening after. Sophie handled medications and discharge planning like she had been born to run a unit. Jamal stayed on the phone with banks, investigators, and whoever else needed to hear the clean, legal version of the truth, and Bradley kept trying to make himself the center of the story. The messages changed in tone depending on the hour. Morning, threats. Afternoon, bargaining. Late night, apology. He said I was overreacting. He said he had only been trying to manage temporary pressure. He said my mother's credit would have been restored before she ever noticed. He said I was ruining his life over a misunderstanding. Then, when none of that worked, he sent the message that ended any trace of emotional ambiguity I had left. You know how much pressure I was under. A supportive wife would have helped me fix this privately. I read that once and then handed the phone to Jamal without a word. He read it, looked up at me, and said, "Keep that." So I did, because he was right. Bradley's greatest weakness was not just greed. It was narrative entitlement. He genuinely believed he could still frame himself as the injured party, if he found the right language. He believed marriage meant immunity. That pressure explained theft. That being a wife meant being recruited into whatever cover story a man needed in order to survive his own consequences. By the end of the week, I had filed for divorce. Not dramatically, not with a speech, not in a surge of symbolic fury. Just paperwork. Signature. Submission. I think that was fitting. Bradley liked spectacle. He would have understood shouting. He would have understood tears. Ultimatums. Plates breaking in the kitchen. What he never understood was finality. The divorce filing landed while the institutional side of his life was still tightening. I did not ask for constant updates about the company investigation. But some came anyway through the channels Jamal was managing. Enough to make the trajectory clear. Forensic review. Access audit. Questions around transfers and reporting. The language stayed dry. That was how I knew it was serious. The fraud issues tied to my mother moved forward too. Slowly. Then, all at once, her credit reports were flagged. The disputed lines were frozen. Follow-up statements were requested. Case references multiplied. Every part of the machine was annoyingly procedural. But it was still motion, and motion matters. A week after the collapse of the house, I brought my mother home. She moved carefully, still weaker than she wanted to admit. But she walked in through the front door on her own feet. That mattered to me more than almost anything. The bags in the sitting room were gone by then. Jamal had arranged for Bradley's attorney to retrieve them from the porch with advance notice. And no direct contact. Clean. Documented. Boring. Again. Fitting. My mother settled into the downstairs guest room we had turned into a recovery space. Before her procedure, fresh sheets, pill organizer, water on the nightstand, one of Sophie's absurdly soft blankets folded at the end of the bed. That first evening, the house felt strange in the best possible way. Not triumphant. Not festive. Just safe. I made grilled cheese and tomato soup because it was all any of us had the energy for. Sophie came over after work. Jamal came later with a stack of printed updates he swore we did not have to look at tonight. We ate at the kitchen island instead of the dining room because nobody felt like performing dinner. At one point, my mother looked around the room and said, softly, "It feels peaceful in here." Nobody answered immediately because we all knew what she meant. Not just that she was home, that he was gone. That same night, after everyone left and my mother was asleep, I stepped out onto the back patio with a glass of water and stood in the dark for a while. The yard lights cast that soft gold glow Bradley used to brag about to guests. Like landscaping was the thing that made a home feel finished. I used to stand out there with him during parties, listening to him talk about square footage and property values and upgrades. And I used to think the unease in my body was just fatigue. It was not. It was what happens when you are building a life around someone who values surfaces more than people. I stood there barefoot on the patio stone and let that truth settle all the way in. For years, I had mistaken endurance for maturity. I had told myself that keeping the peace was wisdom, that downplaying the small cruelties made me strong, that helping Bradley manage his moods, his image, his endless appetite for more made me a good partner. But the truth was smaller and sadder than that. I had been adapting to a reality that should never have been normal. And once you see that clearly, peace stops looking passive. It starts looking like self-respect. A month later, the divorce was moving. My mother was stronger. The house had changed. Not physically at first, though eventually we moved furniture, boxed up the last of Bradley's things, donated the art he chose because it looked expensive, and turned his home office into something useful. But even before any of that, the atmosphere changed. Music came back. Windows stayed open longer. Nobody checked the driveway with dread when headlights hit the curb after dark. Nobody lowered their voice in anticipation of criticism. Safety is not a grand feeling. Usually it arrives in tiny permissions. Sit down. Exhale. Leave a dish in the sink without wondering if someone will weaponize it later. Tell the truth in your own kitchen. By the second month, those permissions had become a life. I do not mean everything was magically healed. It was not. There were legal calls, administrative headaches, days I felt wrung out from work, hospital follow-ups, and paperwork, all layered together. And there were grief moments I did not expect. Not grief for Bradley exactly. More like grief for the years spent negotiating with reality instead of naming it. But even those moments were cleaner than life with him had been. Because they were honest, one Friday evening near the start of fall, I came home from work and found my mother in the kitchen arguing gently with Sophie over how much garlic belonged in a pasta sauce. Jamal was opening a bottle of wine at the island. The radio was on low. Someone had left a grocery bag on the floor. Someone else had laughed hard enough to need the counter for balance. I stopped in the doorway and just watched them for a second. No performance. Null tension. No one curating the scene for status, just people who loved one another acting like it. My mother looked up first. "There you are," she said. "You're late. Apparently I'm forgiven." I said, "Barely," Sophie replied. Jamal handed me a glass without asking whether I wanted one. That tiny certainty almost undid me more than anything dramatic could have. I took the glass and leaned against the counter while they kept moving around me. And it hit me that this was the ending. Bradley never could have understood. Not punishment. Not humiliation. Not even loss. Exactly. He had believed he was central because he was loud, expensive, and difficult to ignore. But once he was gone, life did not collapse around the space he left. It clarified. Later that night, I walked through the house, turning off lights. When I passed the front hall mirror, I caught my own reflection and stopped. I looked tired, older than I had 6 months earlier, but steadier too, like someone who no longer needed to waste strength translating obvious things into more tolerable language. My phone was in my hand. There were still unread messages in the archived thread with Bradley's name on it. And maybe there always would be, at least until every piece of the legal machinery finished grinding forward. But by then, I understood something I had not understood on that hospital floor. The day everything split open, closure was never going to come from the perfect last exchange. It was never going to come from hearing him finally say the exact sentence that would make all the damage legible and contained. Closure had already happened. It happened the moment I stopped treating his version of reality like something I was required to live inside. I set the phone down on the entry table and switched off the hall light. The house went soft and quiet around me. Behind me, from the kitchen, I could still hear my family laughing. And for the first time in a very long time, that sound did not have to compete with anything.